And tonight we are going to talk about Taylor Swift and things like the Swiftian Turn, Swiftology, and also what we can learn from Taylor Swift in academia. Of course, Taylor Swift is a superstar. She inspires millions and millions of Swifties. She's also a multi-million-dollar company, and her influence even reaches our universities and our academic journals. But in what way is she challenging our academic ideals of knowledge and expertise? The guest speaker that we have for you tonight is Sigrid Wallaert, and I thank you very much for coming to Maastricht all the way from Ghent. And Sigrid Wallaert is a philosophy researcher at Ghent University, where she did a master and a research master in philosophy. And she has just finished her PhD about the value of feminist rage. And I would like to give the floor now to Sigrid Wallaert. The floor is yours. Please give her a warm applause. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. So yeah, here I am to talk about how Taylor Swift revolutionized academic knowledge. Before I start talking about Taylor Swift, I think maybe I should talk about myself. This is me. As you might gather after a few slides, I have attempted to title all of my slides after Taylor Swift songs. I wasn't always successful, but for this one I was still hopeful for the first slide. So who am I? This is me. That's me. My name is Sigrid Wallaert. I am a postdoctoral researcher now, since very recently, in philosophy at Ghent University in Belgium, where I completed my PhD, also in philosophy. My defense was in December, so I'm a very fresh PhD. My PhD, as Jaap already said, was about feminist rage, and usually my work centers around feminist philosophy, social epistemology, and now I'm hoping to work in health humanities. If I get postdoc funding, that's what I'll be doing. And also, jumping to the last line of my slide, occasionally I work on Taylor Swift. That's kind of an accident, basically. I tend to get involved in things that I just kind of find interesting. Like when I was looking for a topic for my master's dissertation back in 2018, I was just kind of looking around at what was happening in the world, and I saw that lots of things were happening about female rage. So I was like, sure, let's see what's going on. And it's kind of in the same way that I ended up working on Taylor Swift, or working on is maybe a euphemism. But well, yeah, this is work. But talking about Taylor Swift and thinking about Taylor Swift, in that I noticed that suddenly Taylor Swift was everywhere in academia. And I was like, interesting, let's see what's going on. So that's why I'm here. I am also a childless cat lady, and I think we all know another childless cat lady. Oh wait, before we go there, I need to do my self-promotion, which is that I wrote a book. It's called Spreken, gelooft, boze, vrouw. It's in Dutch. It's about feminist rage and epistemic injustice. It's introductory. It's short, and I think it's fun. So that was my self-promo. And then from one childless cat lady to another, who is more well-known, I would say. In case you are in the same position as my grandma, and I need to explain to you who Taylor Swift is. Taylor Swift is an American singer-songwriter, but I assume that most, if not all, people here do know who Taylor Swift is. And I'd like to do a little survey of the audience to know who we've got here today. So who here would self-identify as a Swiftie? If you could raise your hands. That's less than I thought. Interesting. That's fun. Who would identify as a philosopher? One single philosopher. Fun, good. Good to have you. Then I'm interested what brings the rest of you here. Maybe just curiosity. Who is open to becoming a Swiftie by the end of this evening? Some people ready to be converted. I'll do my best. So Taylor Swift is an American singer-songwriter. Is also a near-pathological record breaker. There's all sorts of listicles on the internet about records Taylor Swift has broken. I chose a few. She has the most Album of the Year Grammy wins and also the most Album of the Year Grammy nominations of any artist ever. She has the first tour to earn $2 billion. She is currently the most played artist on Spotify, and you can go on for, I think, a whole hour lecture just listing records Taylor Swift broke, which I will not do. She is also a billionaire, which is not irrelevant to some of the topics we will be talking about today. This is not a similarity with me. What is a similarity is that she is a childless cat lady. And maybe another similarity is she a philosopher? Maybe, we'll see. It definitely seems like some people see Taylor Swift as a philosopher or as a voice in academia anyway. There is a sort of change in the air of academia, it seems. With, for example, the Swiftposium, the academic conference, which was held last year, I think in February in Australia, to discuss basically all academic work on Taylor Swift, which was also for me kind of the beginning of my research into, research is again, maybe a bit of a euphemism, but my academic interest in Taylor Swift, I thought it would be nice and easy to attend online, because of course, like the hybrid events after COVID, nice and easy. What I didn't think about was that Australia is in a very different time zone to Belgium. So my talk ended up being at 3 a.m., which was unfortunate, but it was still fun. And it really embodied the kind of spirit, I think, that a lot of the academic interest in Taylor Swift shares, which is a kind of inclusive enthusiasm and joy in research and in incorporating a shared love of music, of an artist, into our day jobs, into our work, and taking something seriously that isn't usually taken very seriously, or at least not in that way. And after, or kind of parallel to Swiftposium, we're seeing different academic publications coming out about Taylor Swift. One of them with, I think, one of the ugliest covers I have ever come across is Taylor Swift and Philosophy. I mean, I was sad that I missed the call for papers for this one, but I think I would be embarrassed to be in a book with such a cover. So maybe it's not too sad that I missed it. And then with a much better cover, my friend Dr. Ali McCausland has a book about the poetry, the literature in Taylor Swift's lyrics coming out. So, and these are just two of what is kind of a booming field. And today I kind of let myself be inspired by this change in the academic air to talk about Taylor Swift in academia in 3 main areas. So the first area we'll be covering is Taylor Swift's influence on academic knowledge and research. This is what I wrote a little essay about, and also like knowledge and epistemology is kind of my topic of research anyway. Then we'll be talking about angry women, of course, because I wrote a dissertation on feminist rage, and contemporary feminism and Taylor Swift's influence there. And finally, we'll be covering Taylor's role and influence, or lack thereof, in politics and current affairs. And as Jaap already announced, there will be lots of time for questions after. So do your best to already think of questions, because there's a lot of time for questions. So we don't end up with silence. So let's go. The first of 3 themes for today is what I would like to call Swiftian knowledge. And this can be embodied by what I like to call the Swiftian Turn. Now, it's kind of a fun thing for academics, I think, to call things a turn. It sounds nice, it's a fun thing to do. And I use the term of the Swiftian Turn to really signify this surge of academic interest, specifically academic interest in Taylor Swift, in the form of conferences. So there was Swiftposium, but there was also another one in the UK. I think there's others happening still. Books and maybe even talks, like maybe this one today, on Taylor Swift in academia and Taylor Swift's influence on academia, academic approaches to Taylor Swift. And then the thing that tends to happen in a philosophy department, if you use a word or a concept, for example, the concept turn, and a colleague overhears you, they'll ask, what do you mean by that? So of course it also happens to me when I was talking about my Swiftian turn. Colleagues challenged me and asked, why a turn? Why do you use this word? And I think to me, what constitutes a turn in this case is very much vibes-based, and that sounds very vague, and it is very vague. It's intentionally vague. I think the concept of a vibe is underutilized in philosophy. There could be fun things to be done with it in epistemology. And I've been intrigued by vibes ever since in 2021, The New Yorker made like a series of year in reviews and different themes. And one of them was the year in vibes. And they, or the author, described a vibe as a placeholder for an unplaceable feeling or impression, an atmosphere that you couldn't or didn't want to put into words. It's a linguistic shortcut for the ineffable. And this is a very philosophically rich quote that I could do a lot more with than I have time for today. But it very much captures, I think, the essence between my use of the term turn, which is that there's this atmosphere, this impression, this feeling that something's going on, that something's happening, that something's shifting, and then you put a name to it. And then, of course, once you name something, the name you put to the thing changes the thing. So it's inevitable, I think, that by naming the Swiftian turn, by calling attention to it, by grouping it together into a phenomenon, that the phenomenon itself will be changed. There might be a normative element in calling something a turn. It might be that in calling it a turn, I signify that it is a desirable change, that I think we need more of it, that I think there more will follow, that this is a beginning of a larger movement. But it also might be a pragmatic choice, which I think to a large extent it is, because it's certainly not empirical. It's not like I did an empirical research study, put a questionnaire to all of my academic colleagues and asked them what I thought about Taylor Swift. It's very much, as I said, vibes-based, but then pragmatic in that by naming it, you can do something with it. You can take the concept, once it has a name, you can take it and run with it. And this is something I think is useful in academia, which is where, again, we come to the normative element. I think the Swiftian turn does good things for academia, but not everybody agrees. There were very much mixed reviews of the Swiftian turn. The picture we see is of my friend and colleague Ali McCausland, who is wearing a shirt that she had made with a quote on it from a newspaper article that was written about her course. So she organized and still teaches English literature Taylor's version, so the first English literature course to focus on Taylor Swift in Europe, at least. I think there was one in the UK that was earlier. But she, in a large part, inspired much of the Swiftian turn. And the quote that she has on her T-shirt is in Dutch. It says, "Het is een aula, geen kleutertuin," which in English is, "It's an auditorium, not a kindergarten," which is what one journalist said about her class, like, oh, is the university turning into a kindergarten? Which interestingly, those kinds of criticisms, those kinds of kind of fear-mongering voices mostly came from outside of academia. So it mostly seemed like people who weren't actually that involved with the university were very worried about its demise and its demise as an academic institution or its reputation. Whereas the university itself seems, well, not entirely, but to a large part more enthusiastic about changes like this. And then we have the criticisms, we have the people who think it's infantilizing, who think pop music has no place in an auditorium, who think universities should be more rational, etc. But we might also be swiftly discovering, one might say, new academic grounds, as I think we are. And I think the impact we see on academia might be double. So on the one hand, we are challenging what we see as knowledge, and on the other hand, we are challenging the research methodology that we are using through incorporating Taylor Swift basically into academic research and through making space for the kinds of topics and research and researchers who might not otherwise be taken very seriously. And this theme of being taken seriously, and here is where my title quest of titling all of my slides with Taylor Swift songs kind of fell apart a bit, because sadly she hasn't written a song about epistemic injustice yet. But I did need the title Epistemic Injustice. So where epistemic injustice comes in, and this is in philosophy a very popular framework, which kind of strangely has almost never been used in Dutch and has almost never been used outside of academia. In academia, it's so popular that it's kind of a running joke to have epistemic anything, like epistemic soup and epistemic sandwiches. Apparently I'm thinking about food, but to put the word epistemic in front of anything and call it research. But this trend started with Epistemic Injustice, which still is a book by the British philosopher Miranda Fricker, published in 2007. Her book was called Epistemic Injustice, Power and the Ethics of Knowing. And she put on the map this specific type of injustice done to someone in their capacity as a knower. That can be very broad. And it has, in the years since the publication of the book, been interpreted in a much broader way than Miranda Fricker intentionally intended, maybe. But what she did is basically focus on the two subtypes that she saw, so different kinds of injustices that can be done to someone when it comes to them engaging with knowledge, basically. One of them is testimonial injustice, the other is hermeneutical injustice. I'll just introduce them quickly and then we'll take them on to Taylor. But testimonial injustice happens when somebody is taken less seriously based on stereotypes assigned to them. Their testimony is taken less seriously, which is where the name comes from. So, for example, I'm speaking in front of you all today, and you do not know me, I don't think. You are making a judgment about my credibility, about how much credibility to assign to me based on very limited information. And Miranda Fricker calls this kind of limited information stereotypes. It's kind of associations we make very superficially when we meet someone and we don't have the deep knowledge about their character, about their background, about the way they function, but we just have some external characteristics and we infer from them how credible they might be. I think for me it might help that I have the title doctor in front of my name. That might boost my credibility. Then my credibility might be taken down a notch again because I'm talking about Taylor Swift. But based on these kinds of superficial judgments, we all make credibility judgments when we're faced with somebody speaking to us. And these stereotypes can be positive or negative. And actually, both ways constitute an injustice. So when you assign somebody too much credibility, that can be an injustice, mostly to other people probably. And when you assign somebody too little credibility, that is also an injustice, which falls under testimonial injustice. And we'll see later how that relates to Taylor in academia. And then we have hermeneutical injustice, which happens when people have a hard time understanding themselves and then specifically the types of injustice they face because there simply aren't suitable concepts for them. This often happens when people are kind of situated at the margins of society and their experience simply isn't seen as the standard experience. So there simply aren't as many hermeneutical tools, as many concepts, as many frameworks for them to understand themselves. And the fact that this distribution of concepts to understand yourself is not equal. Not everybody has the same amount of theories and concepts to know what's happening to them. Not everybody sees themselves represented in the same way as your standard white man does. And this injustice is also located in the fact that it's often not accidental. So it's true that this distribution of concepts is not equal, but it's often not an accident that there aren't concepts to describe or to understand certain experiences of injustice, because the groups that are in the most power and also in the most epistemic power often benefit from those injustices remaining under the radar. An example of this is sexual harassment, which was a non-existent concept until something like 50 years ago. And of course, the people who tend to be in power societally are also generally in the same kind of sphere as the people who are the perpetrators of sexual harassment. Again, very generalizing men. Well, not that generalizing men. And because they benefited from sexual harassment remaining under the radar, they also didn't put any effort into really understanding this phenomenon. So it was really through a grassroots movement of women victims of sexual harassment really coming together and consciously developing this term that this term came to be, and that understanding of the phenomenon spread, which is a very good example of hermeneutical injustice because it shows both the lack of concepts, like the experience of sexual harassment was there, the injustice was there, but there were no concepts to grasp it. And the non-accidental nature of the fact that these concepts weren't there, and how you can combat it by uniting victims and really consciously generating knowledge. Now, if you are perhaps in the market for an introduction to epistemic injustice, might I suggest a small book? But to move on to Taylor again, I think it's not that hard to see how something like testimonial injustice is very much at play when it comes to Taylor Swift in society. Well, Taylor Swift as a person, but also the Swifties, the general phenomenon of Taylor Swift and her music. Because stereotypes about Taylor herself and about Swifties and about what it means to be interested in her and her music are very prevalent. We have the themes of her simply saying about boys and breakups. Again, simply, why that simply? The girly, glittery, frivolous associations, the emotional, the irrational. And these are all stereotypes, in a way, kind of shortcut associations between Taylor or Swifties and then used to infer on their credibility. If you are known for dancing around in glitter suits, then you are not taken as seriously, perhaps, as if you were to do the same thing in a business suit. If your songs focus on very much the feminine experience, girly experiences, focus on emotions, focus on heartbreak, again, those themes are grouped in the irrational side of things and therefore taken less seriously. And here we very much see that these stereotypes are active, are prevalent, because like why is it surprising that philosophy and Taylor Swift are unified in one lecture? Would the same surprise be felt if it was, I don't know, the first name who comes to my head is Nick Cave and philosophy? Maybe not. Why is that? What are the stereotypes, the underlying assumptions beneath there? And the thing that the Swiftian Turn very much does, and that I try to do as well and try to further in things like this, is, and also what I like about the Swiftian Turn is that it very much claims this type of research as serious, both as serious research and as serious knowledge. It defies these stereotypes. It refuses to let traditionally girly and frivolous themes be put to the side, but it really takes these on board in academia into these very old, rusty institutions and does something with them. And sure, this might benefit Taylor, like she might be taken more seriously, but mostly I think it benefits the fans. This contributes to the way people are perceived when they identify as Swifties. And I think it's very clear also in my own experience that people who engage in Taylor Swift research or just enjoy her music engage in what Christy Dodson calls testimonial quieting and testimonial smothering. Testimonial quieting happens when your audience, which can be in a very literal sense, as in people in a room listening to somebody speak, but also simply someone you're in a conversation with, when they expect you to kind of change the way you talk or change what you say in order for them to take you more seriously. And then I think very pertinent here is testimonial smothering, where as a speaker, you expect that your audience will take you less seriously for various reasons, and you preemptively change what you say or how you say it or how you express it. So you basically engage in a type of self-silencing to fit in certain molds. And even though I am here talking in front of a kind of large room about Taylor Swift, whenever I go for drinks with colleagues, I still find myself kind of hedging and being like, oh yeah, I enjoy her music, but you know, not that seriously, and kind of taking some distance from, for example, Taylor Swift, in the same way that I also did with my research on feminist rage, where I talked about the stereotypes at work in society harming feminist rage and harming people who express it. And still, even though that was the whole focus of my work and the whole focus of my PhD was to demonstrate the value of feminist rage, I still felt compelled to distance myself from it, to say, oh, but I'm not that angry actually, and to take this academic distance. And I think both in the case of feminist rage and in the case of research about Taylor, this shows, one, that these stereotypes exist, and two, how pervasive they are, and how even if you are aware of them, if you basically make the whole focus of your point on these stereotypes and the harm they do, they're still in there somewhere, and you have to be very aware of how you engage with them. So that's one way the Swiftian Turn is changing academia, in challenging these stereotypes, in challenging what counts as serious research. And another way the Swiftian Turn is challenging academia is in challenging the methodology. Something that is very central to especially feminist philosophy and feminist scholarship is the notion of positionality. So you, as a researcher, put your own position relative to the subject of your research front and center. You start by positioning yourself, your identity, the place you occupy in society, and then you work from there. Audre Lorde, for example, who there is in a boat on a lake in Berlin, which is one of my favorite pictures of Audre Lorde. She was kind of a pioneer in this and really positioning herself as a, and I'm gonna get the quote wrong, but a black feminist mother, warrior, poet, was how she described herself, like all of these different but intersecting identities. And she very much put these front and center in her work, in her poetry, but also in her prose, in her teaching as well. And this can be related to the philosophical tradition of standpoint epistemology, which basically is very much related to feminism in its emergence, and its central insight was that not only is it impossible to pretend that you occupy this kind of view from nowhere, that you're what Donna Haraway called the God trick, that you're like on your little cloud as your little God floating above the world and like seeing things completely neutrally, that's impossible to do as a scientist, as a philosopher, as a researcher. But also that that's a good thing that that's impossible, that it's a good thing that as researchers we are always situated and we are always in a concrete position in society and in relation to our work, and that if you occupy a marginalized position in society, if you do not have a place at the table, so to speak, that you actually have a better view of the table, and that by looking at the dominant culture and dominant epistemic trends from the margins, you might actually have a better view of what's going on in the center, and you might have a unique perspective on what's going on there, rather than or contrary to the kind of traditional epistemological project, which was basically to be as little involved as possible in your epistemology, in your research, to remove yourself from it and to proclaim these objective truths which came from nowhere. Standpoint epistemology refuses this, and positionality is kind of the way of enacting this refusal by really claiming your own position and putting your own position front and center. And this, I think, is something that researchers who work with Taylor Swift do as well, because our own identity as fans of Taylor Swift is front and center. This was something that was very clear at the Swiftposium, that the people who were there as fans and as researchers, but those identities were equally valid. So the identity as fan was not put to the side in order to be able to do more objective or more serious research. Those identities as researcher and as fan really coexisted and intermingled and influenced each other. And one way in which this happens is by incorporating emotions in research. And these can be so-called negative emotions like anger or sadness or shame. I've spent a PhD on the role of anger, and I kind of ended or concluded with some remarks on what anger or incorporating anger in research could do for us and what benefits it could bring. But what's interesting about the Swiftian Turn, I think, is that rather than those negative emotions, it really incorporates joy. This was also something that was very apparent in the Swiftposium and in kind of all of the academic Swiftie spaces I've been in, that researchers joy in combining this thing they're passionate about, the music of Taylor Swift, and this other thing they're passionate about, their research, and bringing those two together is just fun, and it brings us joy. And just like Audre Lorde was no less of a serious thinker because she was happy on the boat in Berlin, I think it's in a way unexpectedly subversive to get joy out of your work. In a way that might not be as obvious as it is with negative emotions, because joy seems to be more appreciated. But again, when you're a researcher, the idea seems to be that something like joy might interfere with your objectivity again. So the fact that feminist, it's kind of a Freudian slip, but Swiftie academics, Swiftie philosophers, feminists, Swiftie philosophers, etc., really incorporate their own joy and bring their own joy into their research is in a way also kind of revolutionary. And then we also have hermeneutical injustice in the Swiftian Turn, which, to recap, is a kind of injustice which happens when there is a lack of conceptual frameworks for self-understanding. And what Taylor does in her work and her music is unapologetically represent girly perspectives. And those are often not taken as seriously for, again, the various stereotypes we talked about with testimonial injustice. But what's more, I think, more relevant here, rather than those stereotypes, is the perspectives, is the experiences that are being placed front and center by Taylor in her music, and which then again help further self-understanding about people going through those kinds of experiences or these kinds of interests. And through the Swiftian Turn, these unapologetically girly perspectives and experiences are kind of academically validated. They receive a kind of academic stamp of approval and are taken in turn more seriously, which can again be a way of challenging ideals of ratio and of what is worthy of academic study and what is not. And then my picture there can be of what she calls female rage the musical, can be seen as a slide into my next bit, which is about Madwoman. And I have the music video next for Madwoman because we're going to discuss some of the lyrics.
What did you think I'd say to that? Does a scorpion sting when fighting back? They strike to kill, and you know I will. You know I will. What do you sing on your drive home? Do you see my face in the neighbor's lawn? Does she smile? Or does she mouth, fuck you forever? Every time you call me crazy, again more crazy, what about that? And when you say I seem angry, again more angry. And there's nothing like a mad woman, what a shame she went mad. No one likes a mad woman, you made her like that. You poke that bear till her claws come out, and you find something to wrap your noose around. And there's nothing like a mad woman. Now I breathe flames each time I talk. My cannons all firing at your yacht. They say, move on, but you know I won't. And women like hunting witches too, doing your dirtiest work for you. It's obvious that wanting me dead has really brought you two together. Every time you call me crazy, seem angry, again more angry. And there's nothing
Okay, good. So that was Madwoman, and listening to it again now, I think I could say 3 times as much about it as I will today. But I'm not the only one to have noticed parallels between this song and what I, in my PhD, kind of funnily enough, called the anger turn. Again, I like calling things turns. In that Taylor herself has also just called it female rage. And this puts her in a tradition of feminist scholarship, which my PhD also very much was based upon. And we have again Audre Lorde with her essay Uses of Anger, we have Bell Hooks with Killing Rage, we have Sarah Ahmed with the concept of a feminist killjoy. And all of these kind of canon feminist essays or works on anger, on women's anger, on feminist rage, these terms are often used very confusedly, have in common that they value this type of anger. They take it as their object of research, and they value it positively. They value that this anger, the specific type of anger, can do something, and it can do something for women. And they also, like for example, Sarah Ahmed with her concept of the feminist killjoy, she acknowledges that being a feminist is often about just not being very fun to be around. Like, it's kind of spoiling the fun. It can be fun to be ignorant of certain issues, of things going wrong, but when you point them out, you're seen as a killjoy. As we'll again see later as well, you're seen as the source of the problem. So being a feminist is often very closely related to anger, to showing your anger at things, to causing other people's anger, at disrupting their kind of idea that things are going well. And also, interestingly, this term mad that Taylor uses in her song combines these concepts of angry but also of crazy, which is a pointer to various delegitimization techniques that are used to cause women's anger to be taken less seriously. And one of these is psychologizing it, is putting various diagnoses on it, like hysteria, for example, historically was a very politically useful diagnosis. Ridiculing is another strategy used to delegitimize women's anger. Going back to ancient Greece, there's this paper that talks about how in ancient Greece, the angry woman was kind of a running gag, was this joke that everybody found funny. So if an actual woman was actually angry, then nobody took her seriously. We have infantilizing women and their anger. Again, a way of taking them and their anger less seriously. And of course, women are angry, but they're not just angry for no reason. They might have a very good reason for anger. And in philosophy, there is a very good paper by Amiya Srinivasan, which is called The Aptness of Anger. And in it, she kind of, I'm going to have to make sure I don't get too enthusiastic and go over time, but she shifts the conversation, because in everyday conversation, when we're confronted with somebody who is angry, we tend to ask them, why? What's wrong? What's your issue? Whereas in academia, when confronted with anger, the questions researchers tend to ask are about the consequences. They're about, what does this anger do? Is it productive? Does it help us? And what Srinivasan did is shifting the conversation in academia back to these reasons, back to the why. And what she ended up showing was that it's very much possible for anger to be, as she said, apt or fitting or in its right place. And the conditions she set out for anger to be apt is that it is in response to a real moral violation, that this is a personal reason and a reason that you know. Now, there is lots of literature, including my own, in conversation with that, but the contribution she makes of shifting the conversation to reasons of anger is very important, also because of another distinction between reasons and causes. Because one delegitimization technique is to portray anger, and especially women's anger, as caused, so kind of like a one domino block hitting another. It's like something happens, okay, you get angry. For example, this is simply your personality, so you get angry. But by shifting from these kinds of causes, which are not conscious, there's no free will in there, to reasons which acknowledge that somebody knows what is going on in their situation, that somebody is aware of what's happening and makes, to a certain extent, a conscious choice to voice this anger, is an important shift that Srivasan makes, and can also be linked to Aristotle even. Aristotle's definition of anger talks about it being a response to a perceived slight, and that then runs through philosophy, to also feminist philosophy, for example, Alison Bailey, who calls anger the emotion of injustice. And then we have Taylor, who says, you made her like that. So it's also pointing at somebody's responsibility for something has been done, an injustice has been done, which made this person angry. It's not simply because she is mad or because this is her personality. Something happened, and this is a reason for her anger. And when you respond to a cause for anger, to a reason for anger, Taylor says this response is treated like the offense itself. And philosopher Taylor is very right with that, because this is basically what Sarah Ahmed says. Sarah Ahmed, in her book, I think, about feminist killjoys, says to expose a problem is to pose a problem. She's very good in these kind of aphorisms. And what this amounts to is that when you are the one to stand up and say that something isn't right, you are seen as a nuisance, and you are also seen as the source of this problem. When everybody is content kind of letting injustice go under the radar and just continuing how things have always been, and one person stands up and says, no, this can't be anymore, we have to change things, that person will, Sarah Ahmed says, and I think it's fairly common sense, be seen as a problem, and sometimes even as the source of the problem, the source of the injustice that they are pointing out. And what Taylor says is, does a scorpion sting when fighting back? Like the scorpion, okay, you have a scorpion sting, you have an issue, but where does it come from? Does it come from reacting to another issue? As I said, the distinction between reason and causes is very important here, in that anger is also often misattributed, and this is in a way also a delegitimization strategy, in that anger is attributed to, for example, in the case of the angry black woman stereotype, attributed to simply the personality of these types of women, a cause in this case, and then the possibility that this angry woman might have a very good reason, a reason that fits all of Srinivasan's criteria for apt anger, is immediately discounted, because her anger is brought back to her personality, to a cause. It's a kind of domino reaction, which can quickly lead to a kind of effective injustice, which is a whole other tangent I will spare you. But injustice is based on who can express which types of emotions are basically effective injustices, and I think that is an issue here as well. In my research, I called kind of a new way of looking at feminist rage, the anger turn, which started after Me Too with lots of publications on women's anger, female rage, etc. And this feminist tradition getting wider uptake. And in a way, this kind of positive revaluing of women's anger, Taylor Swift fits into that as well, with songs like Madwoman, with her more recent album, which wasn't out yet when I made this part of the slides for Madwoman, with really claiming and reclaiming this figure, this character of the Madwoman, both angry and crazy, and kind of using the empowering effects of that. And what I think both Taylor and I would agree on is that there is something valuable and useful and special in feminist rage, in a mad woman, and apt anger should be allowed to be expressed, which is links back to the effective injustice literature I will leave out of this, and it should also be listened to, because there is a lot to learn from listening to women's anger, to feminist rage, and from appreciating the fact that it has reasons and not just causes. But then you still have to be careful, I think, to not go one step further and encourage anger, especially feminist rage, because when you shift to encouraging the righteous anger of victims of a type of injustice, it can almost become victim blaming, where you expect the victims of an injustice, for example, misogyny, to basically solve their own injustice by kind of mobilizing the emotions they feel in response to it. And that's a dangerous thing to do, I think. So listening to anger, yes. Encouraging more anger, dangerous. Moving on to the political aspect, because I think the link we can, or the little bridge we can use is in which way should we shape, mobilize, need our emotions, but also the way we engage in the world to fit certain political goals and targets. And this is definitely an issue you face if your name is Taylor Swift. Because in the last American elections, her involvement was subject of a lot of public debate. She did have some involvement in it. She endorsed a candidate and she encouraged people to vote. But on the other hand, she was criticized for not having enough of an involvement in the elections, for not backing the Democrats strongly enough, for being kind of too bland. And she was, I saw on social media, often kind of portrayed as this figure who could unify America. Like if Taylor Swift, there were these horrible AI images of Taylor Swift and Donald Trump singing a happy song together. And like this idea that if you unified Taylor Swift and Donald Trump, you'd have all of America behind you and you could do anything. Or on the other hand, this idea that if Taylor Swift, with all of her influence and with her reach in also more conservative areas and with her popularity among a very diverse group of people, well, semi-diverse group of people, could have a decisive influence on the elections, and then was criticized for not using it to its fullest extent. And then I think an issue is that maybe in trying to be an artist everyone can enjoy, in trying to be an artist whose music both conservative and democratic voters can enjoy, as they do, as is demonstrated that the demographic that listens to Taylor Swift's music is quite politically diverse, that she has to kind of contend with the issue of ending up not truly being for anyone. Because if you try to be so unoffensive, so open to every single interpretation, you kind of are barred from taking any kind of stance. And in a way, this might lead to nobody really identifying with you anymore, because if you're so bland, everybody can read anything into you, then you're also so bland that nobody can really recognize themselves in you anymore. So I think that's a balance she has to strike. And for me personally, I find it hard to contend with the fact that, for example, Taylor Swift has not spoken out on Palestine. Of course, mitigating factor, few Americans with platforms like hers have, if any. Like, she has a massive platform, and I don't think many people of her with an influence her size have really taken a stand. But still, if we look at the involvement of the US with backing Israel's genocide in Gaza and financial support and providing weapons and moral support, and the links between the founding myths of both the US and Israel, there's really this whole intermingled backing there, and their respective histories in colonization, both the US and Israel. This myth of them being states which are founded, like the quote from one of the founders of Israel is, "A land without a people for a people without a land." And this is the quote the US founding fathers would have liked as well, because they had this idea of, oh, we'll just go live in this big empty space in this big empty piece of land. But of course it wasn't empty, there were people living there. And the same thing goes for Israel, where it was positioned as, oh, we'll just, the Jews have been through all of these hardships, and of course they deserve to be safe, so we'll just go to a place where there's nobody living there, so we'll just be there out of harm's way. But there were people living there, the Palestinians were living there. So we have this parallel in the history of the US and the history of Palestine. And of course, Taylor is American and is very much kind of interwoven into these American myths and founding myths and this American story and this American dream, etc. So it is understandable that she doesn't speak out. But still, I find it difficult because her potential impact in an issue like that, especially because of the involvement of the US, is huge. Like, a statement from Taylor Swift could do huge things, and yes, it would make her a lot less popular with a lot of people, but it could do a lot. And my slides are in strange order. We'll put a pin in potential impact. Another way in which she could have potential political impact is with feminism. She has kind of taken, well, obviously a much stronger stance when it comes to feminism, with lyrics like "fuck the patriarchy" and with the little keychain. So there is a lot of feminist imagery and text and subtext in her work, but then you can also ask questions about it, like to what extent is this simply a celebrating of girl power, of the figure of the girl boss, of this lean-in feminism? Like, what about the 99%? She could be said to be making feminism more mainstream, which could be a good thing. It's more known to more people, it's more palatable, it's more acceptable to identify as a feminist when it becomes this mainstream popular thing. But on the other hand, does it lose some of its bite? Does it become less radical? Does it actually do anything anymore when it's acceptable to basically everyone? Which links back to what I said before about if Taylor Swift strategically tries to be as palatable as possible, to appeal to as wide a group of people as possible, then she might end up diluting herself so much that she doesn't really mean anything anymore. And I feel like the same risk is present when it comes to her feminism, where it becomes so bland and so palatable that the bite goes out of it and it leaves out basically the 99% and a lot of more marginalized and more radical voices, which of course is kind of a would've, could've, should've, where we need to think critically about the public moral expectations we have of celebrities. In philosophy, we have this kind of aphorism called "ought implies can," which means that if we decide that something is a duty, it should be possible for that person to do it. So you can't give somebody a duty if they're just in no position to fulfill the duty. But then you can also turn this around in certain cases, like Taylor's, where you can say, like, okay, she is very much in a position where she can have more of an impact. Does this imply that she should do more things? Does this imply that she should use this this potential and realize this impact? And what constitutes a moral duty? And these are very big questions for a almost final slide, and I will not be answering them today. But one thing I kept coming back to when thinking about this and when preparing this is more than public moral expectations of celebrities, I think our moral expectations of ourselves are maybe not given enough attention. Because imagine being Taylor Swift and having all of this potential and knowingly not using it. Imagine knowing that you could have this huge impact. Imagine knowing that you have all these billions in your bank account and all of your houses and all of your private jet flights and all of these things, and not using them. To a certain extent, of course, she does. She does donate to good causes, and she is not Elon Musk. So she isn't evil, but she could do more. And I find it difficult to imagine being in a position where you have all of this potential power, you have all of this potential impact for good, and you do not use it in favor of being more palatable to a large audience, I think then. So can we, in the end, call Taylor a revolutionary, an activist, a feminist, or philosopher? I actually don't think that's maybe the most interesting question we can ask. I think the most important role Taylor Swift can play for us as fans, as listeners, as casual enjoyers of her music is an inspiration, is this kind of larger-than-life figure. And as I've come back to throughout the slides, she's kind of sufficiently open and sufficiently open to interpretation that you can project onto her to a certain extent. And she does inspire fans, and fans can exponentially grow her impact with, for example, in the context of academia, we have the Swiftian Turn, where Taylor Swift's work and music and influence has inspired this whole subset of academia. We had the movement Swifties for Kamala, where people were organizing for Kamala Harris based on their shared identity as fans of Taylor Swift. And I'm sure there's more examples of things like these, where fans basically take Taylor's image and influence and run with it and do more with it. So what I would like to conclude on is make the friendship bracelets. So start from Taylor and run with it. Like, we have this community, we have something that unifies people in an important way. And within this giant community, there might be sub-communities who care about more things. For example, about Palestine, for example, about the Democratic Party in the US, about the climate, I don't know, lots of things. A quote from a friend of mine who did his PhD on Kant is that Kant is only one opinion among Kantians. So it's among people who study Kant, it is not like Kant himself is the main authority on what his writings mean. Like, he's simply one opinion, and other people who interpret Kant have just as valid an opinion on what Kant meant as Kant does. So in the same way, I would like to argue that Taylor Swift is just one Swiftie. She is just one person in this community of Swifties, and sure, she has inspired it in an important way, but it shouldn't end there. So I think it is open to us as Swifties, or potential Swifties, or Swiftie-adjacent people, to basically fill in the gaps, to fill in the moral gaps. Why not the Swifties for Palestine? As I said, why not the Swifties for climate? And I think the potential power of Taylor Swift, more than waiting for her to speak out in a way that she most likely will not do, it is still very much possible and useful to leverage this influence and this community from the ground up, from within the fans, and do good with it. So that's where I wanted to end today. I have a little thank you slide. And then it is time for the Q&A.
Thank you, Sigrid, for this wonderful and thought-provoking lecture. Thanks a lot. In the beginning, you asked the room if there were any Swifties in the room, but are you yourself, do you consider yourself as a Swiftie?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, I was just waiting for the answer. But what was
I raised my hand as well in the beginning.
Okay. Oh, I didn't see it. But what was first, you being a Swiftie or a fan of Taylor Swift, or you studying Taylor Swift?
Actually studying Taylor Swift.
Okay.
I enjoyed her music, just casually, but it was through academia and studying it and its influence in academia that I really got into it. So, yeah.
Okay, I will go to the room. Are there any questions? Please raise your hand and I'll come up and running to you. Yes.
That was very close, yeah. Thank you, Sigrid, for your interesting talk. I was just wondering, during your talk, you were... I was actually thinking, okay, she's been criticized for quite a few things, also for being like a white feminist, which I thought then was interesting to put her into like the Black feminist epistemology kind of tradition. So I was just wondering if there's, like, in the Swift academia kind of sphere, if there has been any like research on that, like kind of placing her in like feminist tradition.
Not that I know of. Again, this is very new, of course, and I'm not aware of that. And also, I would like to add a small bit of nuance in that I wouldn't place Taylor Swift in there, but I would place the Swiftian Turn in that tradition. So it's again my conclusion that fans of Taylor do much more with her influence than she does herself. And I think that is one aspect of that her fans and the Swiftie academics do work in this tradition, but I don't think I would go so far as to put Taylor herself in there. Again, I was kind of conflicted about calling Taylor a philosopher or really looking into her theories on things, even though I did it myself with the song Madwoman. And for example, at Swiftposium, there was a really interesting presentation by somebody analyzing her philosophy of reputation, which was very fun and interesting also simply. But yeah, I think that I would be more comfortable situating thought with the Swiftian Turn itself within this tradition of standpoint epistemology, positionality, black feminism, rather than putting Taylor in there, and it's this kind of her influence running away from her a bit in a good direction. But yeah, so that's what I would say to
that. First, yeah, thank you for the talk. And also my question is more of Taylor's always associated in the early days with country, and country is a very Republican thing, or it's connected to it or associated with it. Do you think that is why she is trying to actually because of the past election campaign, she was trying to distance herself? What are your thoughts on that? Do you think she distanced herself?
Yeah, I mean, politically, she has, she's very much come clean as a Democrat. But I do think this background might play a part in why she is so committed to being palatable to anyone, basically, and why she limits her political involvement in order not to kind of alienate her roots, maybe. I don't know, I'm not in her head, but I think that might be part of it, might be a large part of it. Though I think it might also be a cool opportunity to kind of challenge those associations between this kind of music and conservative political leanings. So if she could challenge that, and she could do something fun with that. But yeah, I definitely think that probably plays a role, that she doesn't want to alienate those kinds of parts of her fan base, and yeah.
Okay. I just have a question about the last thing that you said, that you have to take Taylor Swift as an ID and then run with that ID. A lot of people tell me that I'm a bit of a hypocrite because I support Palestine, I support climate change and and myself, I also try to act against climate change, and then I'm called a hypocrite because Taylor Swift takes these private jets. She doesn't say anything about Palestine or Israel. What would you say to those people who then criticize the Swifties and not her as a person?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely a criticism I myself in various shapes and forms have also gotten. One part of this is something that I find annoying whenever you kind of speak out for any kind of activist goal or position yourself as a feminist, for example. One comment I used to get from one very persistent colleague was, why don't feminists care about Ukrainian men? Which was like, okay, you're a feminist, but what about the Ukrainian men? And then I find it so striking that basically when you're publicly seen as caring for one cause, for example, feminism, people apparently place higher moral expectations on you to care for other causes as well, because the same colleague wouldn't have gone up to some kind of nearly retired white man professor and ask him, hey, why don't you care about Ukrainian men? Like, that would be absurd. So through positioning yourself as an activist for various causes, people seem to hold you to higher standards for other causes as well. So that's one thing which I think is stupid. And another thing is that, again, related, holding people who already hold themselves to higher standards in their activism to even higher standards outside of it is also absurd. Like, if you have a person who is a fan of Taylor Swift and eats meat and supports Israel, or you have a person who is a fan of Taylor Swift, is a vegetarian and is pro-Palestinian, it will be the pro-Palestinian person who is criticized for Taylor Swift and her private jet antics, and not the other person. Whereas the net impact of the activist person is, of course, much better. So I think it's absurd, and I think the idea of kind of moral consistency in activist causes is overrated. Like, for example, if you're a vegetarian but you eat meat once a month, like, your impact is still, like, perfection in these kinds of causes is much overrated, because it's much better to try your best and to kind of get some way towards perfection than it is to just kind of give up at the beginning because you can't reach perfection, and you know you can't reach perfection. So I think in the same way, it is obviously much better to care about various causes and to be an activist in various domains and have a problematic fave, so to speak, than it is to like not care about those causes at all and then support Taylor Swift and her private jet with a clean conscience. So I think, yeah, I could go on about this, because also you listening to her songs on Spotify doesn't contribute to her emissions, and it's absurd. But yeah, perfection is overrated, and the idea of hypocrisy is used in the wrong places, I think. So yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for the lecture. As a non-Swiftie, I would have the question for you why you think that this is that this is so much focused on Taylor Swift as starting this whole Swiftian turn. Why wasn't it Madonna? Why wasn't it Britney Spears? Why wasn't it Beyonce, to name a more recent, phenomenon? So why Taylor Swift?
Yeah, honestly, I have no idea. I think again, it's the community. But why is the community behind Taylor Swift so much stronger than it is behind these other artists? I don't know. I'm not a sociologist, but I think it's the community, and maybe it is the kind of universal palatability that kind of appeals to lots of different people, and they find something in it and they run with it. But yeah, I think the community aspect of Swifties is super strong, and why it is so strong and why it is in this way stronger than other artists' fan bases, I do not know. But there is definitely research on this. Like, I'm pretty sure you can find papers on this. I just didn't write them.
Did you have a question over here? Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. My question relates to the first part of your presentation. So I was wondering if, having participated into these symposia and conferences, if you found that there are certain fields that are a bit more welcoming to the Swiftian turn as opposed to others, because I imagine that an economist would have no problem studying Taylor Swift as a case study, right? Because, as you mentioned, she's a billionaire. But maybe, I don't know if you encountered a bit more resistance in certain areas.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really know, because I think the context in which I have encountered Swiftie academics are very much in spaces centered around Taylor Swift and not centered around a certain field. So you just kind of collect all kinds of people from different fields who do something with Taylor Swift, and they're all happy to be there. But then how they are received when they go back home to their university departments, I have only limited idea about. I mean, I have my own experience where colleagues are like, wait, are you joking? When I said I attended Swiftposium, I was like, no, I'm not joking. So it's definitely unexpected to, in a field like philosophy. I don't know how much of that is to do with the field, how much of that is to do with the specific department, the tradition we're in, the kinds of the country we're in, I don't know. But I think maybe one aspect in this is the positionality, because the economist, I imagine, can study Taylor's influence on the economy from a very removed perspective, whereas in humanities we might be more involved in our research. We might have more normative claims that we make, which we back ourselves. So in this way, we as humanities researchers, we might be seen as more kind of ideologically involved in our research, so maybe we'll be more judged on it. I don't know, but it's an interesting question. So thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Although it doesn't really have anything to do with my question, I just wanted to thank you for at the end mentioning the more responsibility we have towards ourselves, because I feel like it's very important to not view people as concepts that have an impact on people, but people who make choices every day and also make choices to not do things. But my question was, I wanted to ask at the beginning when you talked about testimonial smothering, I started wondering after you said that a lot about my personal experience in that and how I modify my attitude. I had pink hair for 2 years, and even now that I don't have it, I recognize that I go into conversations a lot, especially in university, assuming people will not take me seriously unless I'm speaking very proper, not talking loudly, not moving my hands a lot, and I'm Italian, so that's hard. And I modify a lot of my attitude towards people to avoid them getting a stereotype and taking me more seriously in the future. So my first part of the question would be if, of course, there's not really a solution on how to deal with it, but if you had any suggestions on how to handle the fact that, yes, on one side, you are contributing to the self-silencing, but you are doing so to avoid consequences that will silence you further with the testimonial quieting instead. So that's the first part of the question. And then the second part, I was wondering if testimonial smothering could have a connection to the way women are also involved in the quieting as well. In Madwoman, she does mention how women are also involved in witch hunts, and how they often, I don't personally believe it's all of it, but they do often do the hard work for men as well, because they don't only act as the oppressor, but they take away from part of the community of the oppressed in the process of testimonial quieting. So I was wondering if you had anything to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's super interesting points. 2 interesting points. Your first point about testimonial smothering and kind of maybe moral responsibility, in self-silencing, what this means for further silencing of yourself and others. I think in those cases, sure, you can make an argument that through self-silencing, people contribute to further normalizing the dominant perspectives and the lack of challenges for them. But then I don't think it is people who engage in testimonial smothering often do so because they are the victims of some kind of injustice and talking about this injustice. And expecting the victims of this injustice themselves to do the challenging of the stereotypes and to do the rewriting of the norms is not how it should be, I think. I think there should be very much the role of allies. And I think there's much work to be done in social epistemology about the role of allies and about how responsibility is often placed in the wrong hands or on the wrong shoulders. So I think that while you can argue for people like engaging less in self-silencing in order to challenge stereotypes, as I think some voices within this feminist rage movement have done, like let out your anger and challenge patriarchal expectations. I think what is more important is to encourage people who are sympathetic to the cause but not directly themselves affected by it, to encourage them to challenge these ideals and expectations and to then make it easier for the people who are direct victims of the injustice to express themselves in a way that is authentic to them. Again, this is also links back to effective injustice, but I could have spoken for 2 more hours about that, so I won't. And then your second question is an interesting connection that I haven't seen made, I think, about how some women's testimonial smothering can kind of become to such an extent internalized that they start quieting other women to also conform to these standards. I don't know. I think it's definitely a plausible thing to happen. Like Miranda Fricker also talks about the way we internalize certain stereotypes, and we can have these stereotypes and hold on to them even if we consciously believe something else. Like they can just kind of be residual somewhere in the back of our minds, influencing our credibility judgments, even if when asked about our opinions, we would consciously say the complete opposite, and we would try to be more liberal often. So I think that there's definitely a case of that, of women having these internalized stereotypes about, for example, stereotypically feminine ways of expressing yourself. And that these women then, because often, like, when it comes to anger or feminist rage, one of the things I talked about and people talk about is these kind of calls to calm down and count to 10 before you speak and things like that, which are often very well intentioned. Like these can be at least said by people who genuinely mean well for you and your message and want you to be heard, but they think you will not be heard if you speak angrily. So they're like, oh, calm down first. Which I then argued is an injustice because it removes the anger and you can't simply like unpack the message from the anger. But that's another point. But I think that these kinds of, because that's a form of quieting, of testimonial quieting. And I think that often does come from this kind of internalized testimonial smothering that, for example, these women have learned their whole entire lives that they cannot speak in anger and be taken seriously. So they want the other women they care about to learn these same lessons. On the other hand, I kind of feel like in a way that might remove responsibility too much from certain women, because, for example, you also have, again, my examples are often about anger, I'm afraid, but you have a book called Angry White Men by Michael Kimmel, and he talks about how the emotion at the core of what he calls this white rage is aggrieved entitlement, which is this idea that you have certain kinds of privileges, but you also deserve these privileges, like these are yours by right, and if you have to share these privileges, that's an injustice to you. So that's kind of this idea at the core of this white male rage. And he talks about how lots of women also share this aggrieved entitlement, and they've just completely taken this on board. And they can, I think, also maliciously silence other women, often more marginalized women then. So I think there should be like a footnote, like, yes, lots of testimonial quieting that women do towards other women can be informed by internalized testimonial smothering, but they shouldn't be used to absolve all responsibility or all ill intent from types of women who might just genuinely believe harmful things and do harmful actions. So yeah, but thank you.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left, so I hope I can give you the floor, but you were first, so you can ask your question now.
So first, thank you for the talk. My question is similar to the first question. And so Taylor Swift is also often criticized for lack of intersectionality in her work, and also kind of weaponizing her fan base on social media against other POC female celebrities. So I'm just wondering, within this field, also since it's so new, whether there are critics of Taylor Swift, and in general, like the Swiftian Turn, and also if there are academics in this field who are not her fans.
Thank you. Interesting. As far as I can tell, there are very few people going to Taylor Swift themed conferences who are not fans of Taylor Swift, and I think that does very much influence the amount of, or the degree of criticism that she gets within these contexts. I also think that maybe some of the fields, because for example, if you have an economist talking about the economic impact of Taylor Swift of her tour visiting a city, that might not be the kind of field where normative reflections are really the done thing. But I do think that that's maybe kind of the other side of the coin of taking your identity as a fan into your research, is that, I mean, of course, as long as you disclose this positionality and are clear in where you're coming from, this can inform your research in a beneficial way, but it does probably blind you to certain criticisms. Although I have to say that if I end up in Swiftie spaces on Twitter, those can be very critical of each other and Taylor and anything they come across. But I do think you're right that because these academic trends kind of originated from a fan community, that leads to certain types of perspectives. Also, again, perspectives in not super critical, but also very white. Like in Swiftposium, I participated online, but I did see quite a few faces there, and they were all white faces, and all of the organizers were white women. So that's an issue. And as I am arguing for the benefits of the positionality involved in the Swiftian Turn, I do think it's also necessary to recognize its limits, as you rightly do. So thanks for that.
Okay, I'm sorry. We have to end. You can come to the after the lecture to the front. I would like to thank you again, and I would like to thank you for coming to this lecture. Let me announce two events that we have in store for you. Tomorrow we have a film and talk evening about Ernest Cole, a photographer during apartheid in South Africa. And next week on Monday we have a lecture on chance and coincidence, and if we can have influence on it. So thank you again. Please give a last applause to Sigrid Wallaert.